Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen when someone thinks they've broken you completely. What they don't realize is that true heroes aren't made by the medals they wear or the uniforms they put on. They're made by the fire that burns inside them when everything else is stripped away. This is the story of what happens when corporate arrogance meets unbreakable courage, and why 8 minutes can change everything. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corporate boardroom of Skyline Airways, casting harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her navy blue uniform one final time before stepping through the glass doors, her Victoria Cross medal catching the light as it hung proudly on her chest. She had no idea that in the next 30 minutes, her entire world would crumble, only to be rebuilt in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Sarah had been flying for Skyline Airways for 12 years, ever since her honorable discharge from the Royal Air Force. Her military record spoke for itself: decorated combat pilot, squadron leader, and recipient of Britain's highest military honor for valor in the face of enemy fire. The Victoria Cross wasn't just a piece of metal. It represented a moment when she had risked everything to save the lives of her fellow soldiers during a rescue mission in Afghanistan that had gone catastrophically wrong. But none of that seemed to matter to Regional Director Marcus Wellington, a man whose idea of combat was navigating office politics, and whose greatest achievement was cutting operational costs by 3% the previous quarter. Wellington sat at the head of the table, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his thin lips pursed in what Sarah would later describe as a smirk that could freeze hell itself. "Captain Mitchell," Wellington began, his voice carrying the condescending tone of a man who had never faced real danger in his life. "Please have a seat." Sarah remained standing, her military training keeping her posture straight and her expression neutral. Something in Wellington's demeanor told her this wasn't going to be a routine meeting. She had been called on our day off with little explanation, told only that it was urgent, and regarding her employment status. "I'll stand, thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. Wellington's assistant, a nervous young woman named Emma, shuffled papers at the far end of the table, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Two other executives flanked Wellington, people Sarah recognized, but had never worked with directly. Their presence felt ominous, like vultures gathering around something dying. "Very well," Wellington continued, opening a thick manila folder. "Captain Mitchell, it has come to our attention that there have been certain irregularities in your conduct as a pilot with Skyline Airways." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Irregularities? In 12 years of flying, she had maintained an impeccable safety record. 0 incidents, 0 complaints from passengers, and consistent praise from her fellow crew members. She had trained new pilots, mentored junior staff, and had even volunteered for the most challenging routes without complaint. "I'm sorry, what irregularities?" Sarah asked, her military composure barely containing her growing anger. Wellington smiled, the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse. "Multiple incidents of insubordination, failure to follow company protocol, and, most recently, engaging in unauthorized communication with passengers regarding military matters." Sarah's mind raced. The unauthorized communication had to be referring to last week's flight to Edinburgh, when an elderly veteran in first class had recognized her Victoria Cross and had asked about her service. They had spoken for perhaps 10 minutes about their shared experiences, with Sarah offering comfort to a man who was clearly struggling with his own wartime memories. It had been a human moment, nothing more. "Mr. Wellington, if you're referring to my conversation with Mr. Thompson on Flight 447, you were representing this company inappropriately," Wellington cut her off. Skyline Airways maintains a strict policy about personal discussions during flight operations. Your conduct violated multiple sections of our employee handbook. Sarah felt the blood draining from her face. This was absurd. The conversation had taken place during cruise altitude, well within the acceptable parameters for passenger interaction. She had been commended in the past for her interpersonal skills with travelers. Furthermore, Wellington continued, clearly enjoying himself, Your military background has created an atmosphere of unnecessary tension among your colleagues. Several staff members have complained about feeling intimidated by your militant approach to operations. This was when Sarah knew the fix was in. Not a single colleague had ever complained about her approach. If anything, they respected her experience and often sought her advice on difficult situations. The pilots' union representative should have been present for this meeting, but Sarah realized she had been deliberately kept in the dark about the true nature of this gathering. "I want to see these complaints," Sarah demanded, her voice rising slightly. "I want names, dates, specific incidents." Wellington's smile widened. "That information is confidential. However, the company has made its decision. Effective immediately, you are being demoted from captain to first officer. Your pay will be reduced accordingly, and you will be placed on probationary status for the next 18 months. The room fell silent, except for the continued humming of the fluorescent lights. Sarah felt as though she had been sucker-punched. A demotion from captain to first officer wasn't just a reduction in pay. It was professional humiliation. It would effectively end her chances of advancement within the airline industry. At 42, starting over as a first officer would make her radioactive to other carriers. "This is outrageous," Sarah said, her military training the only thing keeping her from losing control completely. "I demand to speak with the union representative. I demand a formal hearing." "You can't just— Actually, we can," Wellington interrupted, sliding a document across the table. "Your employment contract includes a clause allowing for immediate reassignment based on operational necessities. You can either accept the demotion or face immediate termination. The choice is yours." Sarah looked down at the document, the legal jargon swimming before her eyes. She had read her contract thoroughly when she joined the company, but, like most employees, she had trusted that her exemplary performance would speak for itself. The operational necessities clause was buried deep in subsection 47 of the employment terms, the kind of legal fine print that corporate lawyers loved and working people never saw coming. Emma finally looked up from her papers, her eyes filled with what looked like genuine sympathy. The young assistant had clearly been uncomfortable with the entire proceedings, but corporate hierarchies had a way of making cowards out of decent people. "Captain Mitchell," Wellington pressed, "we need your decision now. Accept the demotion and continue your career with Skyline Airways, or clean out your locker and find employment elsewhere. I should mention that if you choose termination, the company will be forced to provide references that accurately reflect the circumstances of your departure." It was a threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. Accept humiliation or face career suicide. Sarah thought about her mortgage, her elderly mother's medical bills, the life she had built since leaving the military. She thought about the young pilots she mentored, the passengers who trusted her with their lives, the career she had worked so hard to build. But mostly, she thought about the men and women who had died under her command in Afghanistan, the people she had failed to save despite earning her Victoria Cross for the one she had managed to rescue. They would never have the chance to face this kind of corporate cowardice. They would never again have to choose between dignity and survival. "I need time to consider this," Sarah said finally. "You have 5 minutes," Wellington replied, checking his expensive watch. "The afternoon schedule is waiting, and we need to know if we're making arrangements for a replacement pilot on your flights. 5 minutes to decide her entire future. 5 minutes to choose between financial security and self-respect." Sarah looked around the room one more time, taking the faces of people who had never risked anything more dangerous than a paper cut, people who were about to destroy her life over what amounted to corporate politics and personal vendetta. That's when she heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching the airport. Through the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see a large military helicopter circling the airfield, preparing to land. It was unusual. Skyline Airways didn't typically host military aircraft, and the timing seemed oddly coincidental. Wellington noticed her distraction and followed her gaze to the window. For just a moment, his confident expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. But he quickly recovered, turning back to Sarah with renewed determination. "Your 5 minutes are up, Captain Mitchell." What's your decision? Sarah straightened to her full height, her Victoria Cross catching the light one more time. In her mind, she could hear the voices of her fallen comrades, reminding her that some things were worth more than money or security. Some things were worth more than the comfortable life she had built for herself. She thought about the elderly veteran on Flight 447, about the gratitude in his eyes when she had taken time to listen to his stories. She thought about the young pilots who looked up to her, who saw in her an example of what it meant to serve with honor both in war and in peace. Most of all, she thought about the person she had been before corporate politics and bureaucratic cowardice had tried to reduce her to just another employee who could be pushed around and discarded when convenient. Mr. Wellington, Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, you can take your demotion and shove it. I quit. The silence that followed was deafening. Wellington's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded Sarah of an overripe tomato. Emma's mouth fell open, and the other executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. You're making a terrible mistake, Wellington said, his voice tight with anger. You'll never work in aviation again. I'll personally ensure that every airline in the country knows about your attitude problem and your inability to accept corporate authority. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally remembered who she really was. Mr. Wellington, she said, reaching up to unpin her pilot's wings from her uniform. I've been shot at by Taliban fighters, survived 3 helicopter crashes, and watched good people die because politicians couldn't tell the difference between courage and stupidity. You threatening my career is like a chihuahua threatening a lion. She placed her wings on the polished conference table with deliberate care, the metal making a soft, clicking sound against the wood. And one more thing, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded others in life and death situations. That Victoria Cross on my chest, I earned it by saving the lives of 12 soldiers when our position was overrun by enemy forces. I flew a damaged helicopter through enemy fire for 40 minutes to get them to safety, taking shrapnel on my shoulder and a bullet through my left leg. So when you talk about irregular conduct and intimidating your colleagues, remember that I've seen real courage, and what you people are doing here, isn't it? The helicopter rotors were getting louder now, clearly landing somewhere on the airport property. Through the windows, Sarah could see ground crews scrambling to accommodate the unexpected arrival. Airport security vehicles were racing toward the landing site, their lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Wellington was on his feet now, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment. Security will escort you from the premises immediately. You're no longer welcome on Skyline Airways property. That won't be necessary, Sarah replied, straightening her uniform one last time. I can see myself out. But before I go, let me give you some advice from someone who has actually led people in dangerous situations. She paused, looking directly into Wellington's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had faced down death and lived to tell about it. Real leaders don't break people down to build themselves up. They don't hide behind corporate policies when they want to settle personal scores. And they sure as hell don't threaten war heroes because they're too insecure to handle someone with real accomplishments. Emma was openly staring now, her earlier discomfort replaced by something that looked like admiration. Even the other executives seemed uncomfortable with Wellington's behavior, though none of them had the courage to speak up. Sarah turned toward the door, her military bearing intact despite everything that had just happened. She had made it 3 steps toward the exit when Wellington's voice stopped her. You'll regret this decision for the rest of your career, Mitchell. I guarantee it. Sarah turned back one final time, and when she spoke, her voice carried all the authority and dignity that 12 years of military service and 12 years of civilian aviation had given her. Mr. Wellington, the only thing I regret is that it took me this long to remember that some things are more important than a paycheck. My integrity isn't for sale, and neither is my self-respect. You can't demote character, and you can't fire courage. She walked to the door, her head held high and her Victoria Cross gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. As her hand touched the door handle, she could hear the helicopter engines winding down outside. Whatever military aircraft had just landed, it was clearly something significant. But Sarah's mind was focused on more immediate concerns. She was unemployed, potentially blacklisted from her industry, and facing an uncertain future. Yet for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. The weight of corporate expectations and bureaucratic compliance had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the familiar burden of personal responsibility and moral clarity. As she stepped into the hallway, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass doors of the boardroom. The woman looking back at her wasn't the beaten-down employee who had walked in 30 minutes earlier. This was Captain Sarah Mitchell, Victoria Cross recipient, combat veteran, and someone had just remembered that dignity was worth more than security. The helicopter noise was even louder in the hallway, and Sarah could see airport personnel running past the windows with an urgency that suggested something very important was happening. But that was no longer her concern. She had a career to rebuild, a reputation to restore, and a life to reclaim. She just had no idea that in 8 minutes, everything would change again, this time in ways she could never have imagined. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the airport terminal as she made her way toward the parking garage, each step echoing with the finality of her decision. Behind her, the corporate headquarters of Skyline Airways grew smaller through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she refused to look back. Military training had taught her that dwelling on battles already fought was a luxury that soldiers couldn't afford. The weight of unemployment settled on her shoulders like a heavy pack during a long march. At 42, starting over in aviation would be challenging under the best circumstances. With Marcus Wellington's promised vendetta against her, it might be impossible. But Sarah had faced impossible odds before, and she had learned that sometimes the only way forward was straight through whatever obstacle stood in your path. The terminal was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Passengers hurried past with rolling suitcases and worried expressions, the eternal dance of modern air travel. Sarah had been part of this world for 12 years, shepherding these people safely through the skies, and now she was just another traveler with nowhere particular to go. She was halfway to the exit when the first wave of commotion began. Airport security personnel were running past the large windows that overlooked the tarmac, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Sarah's trained eye caught sight of what had them so agitated. A large Royal Air Force helicopter had landed on the civilian side of the airport, something that required special permissions and typically happened only during emergencies or very important official business. The aircraft wasn't just any military helicopter. Even from a distance, Sarah could identify it as a Merlin HC-4, the type used for VIP transport. Her stomach tightened as she recognized the distinctive markings and the additional security vehicles surrounding the landing site. This wasn't a routine military operation. Other travelers in the terminal were beginning to notice the unusual activity as well. Cell phones appeared like magic, capturing photos and videos of the military presence. Social media would be buzzing within minutes, but Sarah knew that whatever was happening, the really important details wouldn't be shared with the public until much later. She was debating whether to satisfy her curiosity or simply leave when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sarah frowned as she read the brief message. "Captain Mitchell, please remain in the terminal. Important matter requires your immediate attention. Wing Commander Peterson, RAF." Sarah's blood ran cold. Wing Commander James Peterson had been her commanding officer during her final deployment in Afghanistan. He was the man who had recommended her for the Victoria Cross, the officer who had debriefed her after the mission that had earned her Britain's highest military honor. Peterson didn't contact former subordinates unless something extremely serious was happening. She quickly typed back, "Peterson, is this really you? How did you get my number?" The response came immediately. "Still questioning orders, Mitchell? Some things never change. Terminal 2, VIP lounge, 5 minutes." And yes, it's really me. We have a situation. Sarah's mind raced as she changed direction toward Terminal 2. Peterson wouldn't joke about something like this, and his use of her surname in that particular tone brought back memories of urgent briefings before dangerous missions. Whatever was happening, it involved her personally, and it was important enough to bring RAF personnel to a civilian airport on short notice. The VIP lounge was typically reserved for first-class passengers and airline executives, but today it had been cleared of civilians and was crawling with military personnel in dress uniforms. Sarah recognized the insignia of the Royal Protection Unit among the crowd, which meant someone very important was present. Wing Commander Peterson appeared at her elbow as if materializing from thin air, a skill he had perfected during their combat deployments. He looked older than she remembered, with more gray in his hair and new lines around his eyes, but his bearing was unmistakably military. "Mitchell," he said, offering a formal salute that she returned instinctively. "Thank you for responding quickly." "Peterson, what the hell is going on?" Sarah asked, dropping the formal military address they had maintained via text. "I just quit my job 30 minutes ago, and now the RAF is summoning me to VIP lounges. Please tell me this isn't about some paperwork I forgot to file when I left the service." Peterson's expression was grimmer than she remembered from their worst days in Afghanistan. "I wish it were that simple. We have a developing situation that requires your specific expertise, and, unfortunately, time is not on our side." He gestured toward a group of chairs arranged around a small conference table. "Please sit down. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, and I need your word that it won't leave this room." Sarah felt her old military instincts kicking in. Whatever this was, it was serious enough to require immediate response and high-level security clearance. "You have my word, but I'm not active military anymore. Why not use current personnel?" "Because the situation specifically involves aviation, civilian air traffic, and someone with your particular combination of combat experience and commercial flying background," Peterson replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 3 hours ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated terrorist attack on multiple civilian aircraft scheduled to depart from British airports this evening." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Terrorist attacks on civilian aircraft were every pilot's nightmare, the scenarios they trained for but hoped never to face. "How credible is the intelligence?" "Credible enough that we've been authorized to take extraordinary measures," Peterson said, pulling out a tablet and showing her a series of intercepted communications. The targets appear to be 3 separate flights, all scheduled to depart between 1800 and 2000 hours today. The attackers have inside information about security procedures, flight schedules, and airport layouts. Sarah scanned the communications, her trained eye picking out the tactical details that civilian authorities might miss. The language was professional, organized, and specific enough to suggest serious planning and resources. "What kind of inside information are we talking about?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The kind that suggests airport personnel involvement," Peterson confirmed. "Possibly including airline staff, security personnel, or ground crew. The communications reference specific aircraft tail numbers, gate assignments, and crew schedules that wouldn't be available to outside actors." The implications were staggering. An inside job at this level would compromise virtually every security measure airports had in place. Sarah's mind began working through the tactical possibilities, drawing on her combat experience and her knowledge of civilian aviation procedures. "Why me specifically?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer to that question as well. "Because we need someone who can think like both a military pilot and a civilian aviator," Peterson replied. "Someone who understands combat tactics, but also knows how civilian airports and airlines operate. Someone with the authority and experience to make split-second decisions under pressure." He paused, studying her face with the intensity she remembered from their deployment briefings. "And because one of the targeted aircraft is a Skyline Airways flight." Sarah's stomach dropped. Her former airline was one of the targets, which meant her colleagues, people she had worked with for 12 years, were potentially in danger. It also meant that whatever was about to happen, she was personally connected to it in ways that made her uniquely qualified to help. "What aircraft?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be worse than she expected. "Flight 847, departing for New York at 1900 hours, Peterson said, consulting his tablet. "Captain David Richardson commanding, First Officer Susan Chun. Aircraft is an Airbus A330-200, tail number GVSKY. Full passenger manifest shows 247 souls on board." Sarah knew both Richardson and Chun personally. David had been a mentor when she first joined Skyline Airways, teaching her the subtle differences between military and civilian flying protocols. Susan was one of the young pilots she had trained personally, a brilliant aviator with a promising career ahead of her. "This is personal now," Sarah said, her voice hardening with the tone Peterson remembered from their most dangerous missions. "What do you need me to do?" "We need you to be our inside expert on a joint response team," Peterson explained. "Military MI5, airport security, and airline management are coordinating a response, but they need someone who can bridge the gap between military tactics and civilian aviation procedures. Someone who knows how both worlds work." He stood up and gestured toward the windows overlooking the tarmac, where Sarah could see additional military vehicles arriving. "The operation is being coordinated from a mobile command center that we've established here at the airport. Your job will be to provide tactical consultation and, if necessary, serve as emergency aircrew if we need to take direct action." Sarah felt her pulse quickening, the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes operations. "What kind of direct action are we talking about?" "That depends on how the situation develops," Peterson said carefully. "But we've positioned military aircraft nearby, and we have contingency plans for various scenarios. Some of those scenarios might require pilots with combat experience and civilian aviation knowledge." The pieces were falling into place in Sarah's mind. This wasn't just about providing consultation. They might need her to actually fly in whatever operation they were planning. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, the kind of mission that reminded her why she had joined the military in the first place. "There's something else you should know," Peterson added, his expression becoming even more serious. "The communications we intercepted suggest that the attacks are scheduled to begin during the departure window, when air traffic control will be managing multiple takeoffs simultaneously. The goal appears to be maximum chaos and casualties." Sarah understood the tactical thinking immediately. Attacking during peak departure times would overwhelm emergency response capabilities and create opportunities for secondary attacks while authorities were focused on the primary incidents. "How long do we have?" she asked, checking her watch. It was already 1,530 hours, which gave them less than 3 hours before the first targeted flight was scheduled to depart. "Not enough time," Peterson admitted, "which is why we need to move quickly. Are you willing to help?" Sarah thought about Marcus Wellington and the corporate boardroom where she had been humiliated less than an hour earlier. She thought about David Richardson and Susan Chun preparing for what they believed would be a routine transatlantic flight. She thought about the 247 passengers who would board Flight 847 expecting nothing more dramatic than airplane food and cramped seats. Most of all, she thought about the oath she had taken as a military officer, the promise to defend innocent people against those who would do them harm. That oath didn't have an expiration date, and it didn't become invalid just because she had been discharged from active duty. "I'm in," she said, the words coming out with the certainty of someone who had never really left the service, despite changing uniforms. "What's our first move?" Peterson smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. "I was hoping you'd say that. Follow me, Captain Mitchell. We have a country to protect." As they walked toward the command center, Sarah caught her reflection in the terminal windows. She was still wearing her Skyline Airways uniform, complete with the Victoria Cross on her chest, but something had changed in her bearing. The defeated airline employee who had left Wellington's office was gone, replaced by the combat-tested officer who had once flown damaged helicopters through enemy fire. She had no idea that in 6 minutes, her old life would intersect with her new mission in ways that would change everything she thought she knew about honor, duty, and the real meaning of service. The mobile command center was larger than Sarah had expected, a sophisticated communications hub that had been established in one of the airport's in use hangars. Banks of monitors displayed real-time air traffic information, security camera feeds from throughout the airport, and tactical maps showing the positions of military assets. At the center of it all stood a figure that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Even from behind, she recognized the bearing, the careful attention to detail in uniform presentation, and the aura of absolute authority that could only belong to someone accustomed to commanding others in the most critical situations. When the figure turned around, Sarah found herself looking into the face of someone she had only seen in newspapers and on television, but whose presence in this operation suddenly made everything clear. This wasn't just about preventing a terrorist attack. This was about something much bigger, much more personal, and much more dangerous than anything she had imagined when she quit her job an hour earlier. King Charles III stood at the center of the command center like the eye of a carefully controlled storm, his presence commanding immediate attention from every person in the room. Sarah had seen him in ceremonial situations before, during medal presentations and formal military events, but this was different. Here, surrounded by tactical displays and emergency communications equipment, he radiated the quiet authority of someone born to command in crisis situations. "Your Majesty," Wing Commander Peterson said, snapping to attention as they approached. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell, the pilot I mentioned." Sarah found herself automatically straightening to military attention, muscle memory taking over as she rendered a perfect salute. King Charles returned it with the precision of someone who had spent decades in military service before ascending to the throne. "Captain Mitchell," the king said, his voice carrying both warmth and urgency. "Wing Commander Peterson has briefed me on your background. Victoria Cross recipient, combat veteran, 12 years civilian aviation experience. Exactly what we need for this situation." Sarah was struck by how different he seemed from the formal, ceremonial figure she had seen in public appearances. This was a working monarch, someone clearly comfortable with operational briefings and tactical decisions. His uniform bore the insignia of the Royal Air Force, and she noticed the weathered look of someone who had actually flown military aircraft rather than simply wearing the rank as an honorary title. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Sarah replied, maintaining formal protocol despite the unusual circumstances. "I'm honored to assist in any way possible." "The honor is mine, Captain," King Charles replied, then gestured toward the tactical displays surrounding them. "I'm afraid we're facing a situation that requires both military precision and civilian aviation expertise. Wing Commander Peterson has briefed you on the basic threat assessment." Sarah nodded, still trying to process the surreal nature of receiving a mission briefing from the king himself. 3 coordinated attacks on civilian aircraft, inside information suggesting airport personnel involvement, timing designed for maximum disruption during peak departure hours. "Precisely," the king confirmed, moving toward a large display screen that showed real-time air traffic throughout British airspace. "But the situation has evolved since your initial briefing. Intelligence suggests the attacks may be part of a larger operation designed to trigger a broader security response that will create opportunities for secondary objectives." A new voice cut through the background chatter of radio communications. "Your Majesty, we have an update from MI5. Sarah turned to see a woman in a dark suit approaching with a tablet in her hands. She had the crisp, no-nonsense bearing of senior intelligence personnel, someone accustomed to delivering bad news with professional efficiency. "Go ahead, Director Hayes," King Charles said, acknowledging the newcomer with a slight nod. "The intercepted communications have revealed additional targets," Director Hayes reported, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was sharing. "The aircraft attacks appear to be designed to trigger a lockdown of British airspace, which will ground a specific VIP flight currently en route to London." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. VIP flights that would concern MI5 and require the personal involvement of the monarch typically carried people whose safety was critical to national security. Which VIP flight? The king asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Air Force One, Your Majesty. President Biden is currently 3 hours out from Heathrow, traveling for the emergency NATO summit tomorrow. The attacks on civilian aircraft are designed to force a complete airspace closure, which would divert Air Force One to an alternate landing site where additional threats are waiting. The pieces clicked into place in Sarah's mind with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just terrorism. It was an assassination plot using terrorist attacks as cover. The civilian flights were sacrificial pawns in a larger game designed to isolate and target the American president during a critical NATO summit. Diabolical, Wing Commander Peterson muttered, echoing Sarah's thoughts. Use civilian casualties to force Air Force One into a vulnerable position. King Charles studied the tactical display with the focused intensity of someone processing multiple tactical variables simultaneously. What alternatives do we have for the president's aircraft? Limited, Director Hayes replied, consulting her tablet. RAF Nordholt is the primary backup, but our intelligence suggests it's also been compromised. Edinburgh and Glasgow are possible, but the fuel situation becomes critical if we divert that far north. Sarah found herself speaking before she had fully formed the thought. Your Majesty, what if we don't divert Air Force One at all? Every person in the command center turned to look at her. Sarah realized she had just interrupted a conversation between the King of England and the head of MI5, but her tactical mind was already working through possibilities that civilian authorities might not consider. Continue, Captain, King Charles said, his expression encouraging rather than reproving. What are you thinking? If the goal is to force Air Force One into a vulnerable position by creating airspace chaos, then we deny them that chaos, Sarah explained, her confidence growing as she worked through the tactical problem. We stop the attacks before they happen, maintain normal air traffic operations, and Air Force One lands at Heathrow as scheduled. Director Hayes shook her head. Captain, we have less than 2 hours before the first targeted departure. Even if we could identify all the compromised personnel, we don't have time to secure 3 separate aircraft and their support teams. Then we don't secure the aircraft, Sarah said, her military training taking over. We replace them. Wing Commander Peterson caught on immediately. Substitute crews, substitute aircraft, substitute departure procedures. Make the targets irrelevant by changing all the variables. King Charles moved closer to the tactical display, his expression showing growing interest in Sarah's approach. Explain the operational details, Captain. Sarah felt her pulse quickening as she began outlining a plan that was forming in real time, drawing on years of both military and civilian aviation experience. We have 3 targeted flights, all scheduled to depart within a 2-hour window. Instead of trying to secure those flights, we delay them for mechanical reasons and substitute different aircraft with different crews from different gates. She moved to the display, pointing to the airport layout. Skyline Airways Flight 847 is scheduled to depart from Gate 23 at 1900 hours. We develop a sudden hydraulic problem, move the passengers to Gate 31, and substitute a different aircraft with a complete crew replacement. The attack team is positioned to target the original aircraft at the original gate with the original crew. Suddenly, none of their planning matters. Director Hayes was already on her phone, likely checking whether the airport had sufficient backup aircraft and crews to make such a plan workable. King Charles watched Sarah with the attention of someone evaluating both tactical soundness and operational feasibility. The timing will be critical, Peterson observed. Coordinate substitute operations for 3 aircraft simultaneously, plus manage the security response for the compromised personnel. Which brings us to the second part of the plan, Sarah continued, her confidence building as she worked through the details. We don't just substitute the flights. We use them as bait to identify and neutralize the entire network. She turned to address King Charles directly. Your Majesty, instead of disrupting their operation, We let them proceed with their attacks on the wrong targets, while we gather intelligence on their complete organizational structure. Empty aircraft, volunteer crew, controlled environment. The command center fell silent, except for the constant background hum of radio communications and computer equipment. Sarah realized she had just proposed using herself and other volunteers as bait in a counterterrorism operation, all while standing in front of the King of England. "That's exceptionally dangerous, Captain," Director Hayes said, returning from her phone conversation. "You're talking about deliberately allowing terrorist attacks to proceed, even with precautions." "I'm talking about controlling the variables," Sarah replied, drawing on her experience with high-risk military operations. "Right now, they control the timing, the targets, and the tactical situation. If we substitute aircraft and crews, we control all those factors while still giving them the opportunity to reveal their complete operational structure." King Charles was studying the tactical display with renewed intensity, clearly working through the implications of Sarah's proposal. "What would you need to make this work?" "Volunteer crews willing to fly potentially targeted aircraft," Sarah said immediately. "Empty aircraft or aircraft with minimal volunteer passengers. Complete communications monitoring to track their responses when they realize something is wrong. And backup tactical teams ready to respond when they attempt to implement their backup plans." Wing Commander Peterson was nodding approvingly. "It's audacious, but it could work. Instead of playing defense, we go on the offensive while maintaining the appearance of normal operations." "There's another advantage," Sarah added, thinking through the broader implications. Air Force One continues on its original flight plan to Heathrow. No airspace closure, no emergency diversions, no opportunity for the secondary attack on President Biden. Director Hayes looked skeptical. "Captain, you're proposing to volunteer as bait in a terrorist operation. Even with precautions, the risk level is extraordinary." Sarah felt a familiar calmness settling over her, the same focused clarity she had experienced during her most dangerous combat missions. "Director Hayes, with respect, I've been bait before. The difference is that this time, we choose the battlefield." She turned back to King Charles, who was still studying the tactical display with the intensity of someone weighing multiple lives against strategic objectives. "Your Majesty, in Afghanistan, I learned that sometimes the only way to protect people is to put yourself in harm's way. If we can prevent multiple civilian casualties and protect the American president by taking calculated risks with volunteer personnel, then it's not really a choice." King Charles looked up from the display, and Sarah saw something in his expression that she recognized from her own combat commanders, the weight of making decisions that would determine whether people lived or died. "Captain Mitchell," the king said, his voice carrying both admiration and concern, "what you're proposing requires exceptional courage and skill. Are you certain you're prepared for this level of risk?" Sarah thought about the humiliation she had endured in Marcus Wellington's boardroom just 2 hours earlier. She thought about David Richardson and Susan Shun, preparing for what they believed would be a routine flight. She thought about 247 innocent passengers who had no idea they were potential targets in a terrorist plot. Most importantly, she thought about the oath she had taken as a military officer and the promise represented by the Victoria Cross on her chest. The promise to place service above self, courage above comfort, and duty above personal safety. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady with absolute conviction, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." King Charles nodded slowly, then turned to address the entire command center. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our operational plan. Director Hayes, coordinate with airport security and airline management for aircraft substitutions. Wing Commander Peterson, prepare tactical response teams for multiple contingencies. And Captain Mitchell," he paused, looking directly at her with an expression that combined royal authority with personal respect. "Captain Mitchell, you'll be leading the volunteer crew for Skyline Airways Flight 847. Your aircraft, your mission, your responsibility. We'll provide all possible support, but Ultimately, you'll be commanding the operation from the cockpit of a potentially targeted aircraft. Sarah snapped to attention, feeling the weight and honor of the assignment settling on her shoulders like a familiar uniform. Understood, Your Majesty. What's our departure time? 1900 hours as scheduled, King Charles replied. But, Captain, there's one more thing you should know before you commit to this mission. Sarah waited, though she suspected that whatever additional information the king was about to share would only make the situation more complicated. The intelligence suggests that Marcus Wellington, regional director of Skyline Airways, may be involved in providing inside information to the terrorist organization. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The man who had humiliated her and threatened her career might be directly involved in planning attacks on civilian aircraft. The personal had just become political, and the political had just become deadly. Your Majesty, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, that changes everything. The revelation about Marcus Wellington's potential involvement sent shockwaves through the command center that had nothing to do with the tactical situation and everything to do with personal betrayal. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists as she processed the implications of what King Charles had just revealed. How certain is the intelligence regarding Wellington? She asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the fury building inside her. Director Hayes consulted her tablet before responding. Moderate to high confidence. Financial records show irregular payments to offshore accounts, and communications analysis reveals contact with known terrorist facilitators. His position at Skyline Airways would provide access to the flight schedules, crew assignments, and security protocols that appear in the intercepted terrorist communications. Sarah's mind raced back to the boardroom confrontation just hours earlier. Wellington's confidence, his obvious pleasure at humiliating her, the specific timing of her demotion. It all took on new significance when viewed through the lens of terrorist planning. He wanted me out of the way, she realized, speaking the words as they formed in her mind. The demotion, the threats, the timeline. He needed to ensure I wouldn't be flying any of the targeted aircraft. Wing Commander Peterson nodded grimly, which suggests he knows about your military background and considers you a threat to their operational security. A Victoria Cross recipient with combat experience might notice things that other civilian pilots would miss. King Charles was studying Sarah's reaction with the careful attention of someone evaluating how personal animosity might affect professional judgment. Captain Mitchell, does this personal connection compromise your ability to execute this mission objectively? The question cut straight to the heart of military professionalism. Sarah had been trained to separate personal feelings from operational requirements, but she had also learned that sometimes personal motivation could enhance rather than hinder mission effectiveness. Your Majesty, with respect, it makes me more determined to stop them, she replied. Wellington isn't just betraying his company or his industry. He's betraying every passenger who trusts civilian aviation with their lives. That makes it personal for every pilot and crew member who takes their responsibilities seriously. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, King Charles said with satisfaction. Director Hayes, what's our timeline for implementing the aircraft substitution plan? Director Hayes was already coordinating with multiple agencies through her headset. Airport Operations confirms they can provide substitute aircraft within 90 minutes. We have volunteer crews standing by, including several pilots with military backgrounds. The challenging part will be coordinating passenger transfers without alerting the terrorist cells. Sarah moved closer to the tactical display, showing the airport layout. What about Wellington? If he's monitoring the operation from inside Skyline Airways, he'll notice the aircraft substitutions and warn his contacts. We've considered that, Director Hayes replied. MI5 will take him into custody for questioning 30 minutes before the first scheduled departure. His removal from the operational environment will be presented as a medical emergency to avoid alerting his associates. Wing Commander Peterson was studying flight plans on a separate monitor. Captain Mitchell, what do you need for your crew? We can provide any pilot or flight engineer with appropriate security clearances. Sarah thought about the mission requirements. flying a potentially targeted aircraft with the possibility of in-flight emergencies, hostile action, or the need for tactical maneuvering that civilian aviation didn't typically require. "I want First Officer Susan Chun, if she's willing," Sarah said immediately. "She's one of the pilots I trained personally, and she has excellent situational awareness. For flight engineer, I'd prefer someone with military background who won't panic if we have to implement emergency procedures under hostile conditions." Chun has already volunteered, Director Hayes reported, checking her tablet. "She was briefed 20 minutes ago and immediately requested to serve under your command. For flight engineer, we have Master Sergeant Williams, recently retired from RAF transport operations." Sarah felt a surge of pride at Susan Chen's response. The young pilot had shown exceptional judgment during training, and her willingness to volunteer for a dangerous mission confirmed Sarah's assessment of her character. "What about passengers?" Sarah asked. "We can't put civilians at risk, but we need enough people aboard to maintain the appearance of a normal flight." King Charles himself answered this question. "Volunteer military personnel and intelligence operatives, all briefed on the situation and trained for hostile scenarios. Enough to simulate normal passenger loading without endangering civilians." The plan was taking shape with military precision, but Sarah knew that no operation survived contact with the enemy unchanged. The terror cell would adapt when they realized their targets had been altered, and their backup plans might be even more dangerous than the original attacks. "Your Majesty," she said, "we need to consider what they'll do when they realize we've substituted the aircraft and crews. Desperate people make desperate decisions, and cornered terrorists might attempt even more reckless attacks. Which is why we'll have tactical response teams positioned throughout the airport and military aircraft on standby," King Charles replied. "Captain, your mission is to get airborne safely and maintain normal flight operations while we roll up their ground support network. Once you're in the air, the tactical situation shifts in our favor." Sarah nodded, understanding the broader strategic picture. Her job wasn't just to fly the aircraft safely. It was to serve as bait to draw the terrorist response while ground forces neutralized the threats to other flights and protected Air Force One's arrival. "Timeline confirmation," Director Hayes announced, receiving updates through her headset. "Aircraft substitution begins in 45 minutes. All volunteer crews report to Briefing Room Alpha in 20 minutes for final operational details. Captain Mitchell, you'll receive command briefings immediately." Wing Commander Peterson approached Sarah with a tablet containing detailed mission parameters. "Captain, your call sign will be Britannia 7. You'll maintain normal communications with air traffic control while monitoring tactical frequencies for updates on the ground situation." Sarah scanned the mission details, noting the backup airfields, emergency procedures, and contingency plans for various threat scenarios. It was more complex than most combat missions she had flown, with multiple variables and civilian considerations that military operations didn't typically face. "One more thing," King Charles said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "Captain Mitchell, I want you to know that your country is proud of your service, both in the military and in your civilian career. What happened in that boardroom today was an injustice that will be corrected once this situation is resolved." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected. After the humiliation of her forced resignation, hearing those words from the monarch himself was both vindicating and overwhelming. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she managed. "That means more than I can express." "Actions speak louder than words, Captain," King Charles replied with a slight smile. "Show them what a real pilot can do when her country needs her." As Sarah prepared to leave for her mission briefing, her phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Marcus Wellington, sent just minutes earlier. "Mitchell, you'll regret crossing me. Your career in aviation is finished, and I'll personally ensure you never fly again in any capacity." Sarah showed the message to Director Hayes, who read it with grim satisfaction. Perfect timing. This confirms his ongoing communication patterns and provides additional evidence for his arrest warrant. Wing Commander Peterson looked at the message over Sarah's shoulder. The man has impressive timing, I'll give him that. Threatening the pilot who's about to risk her life, stopping his terrorist associates. Sarah deleted the message without responding, then looked around the command center one final time. In 3 hours, she had gone from unemployed airline pilot to military contractor leading a counterterrorism operation under direct royal command. It was surreal, terrifying, and exactly what she had trained for her entire career. "Your Majesty," she said, rendering one final salute before heading to her briefing. Britannia 7 will not disappoint. King Charles returned her salute with the precision of someone who understood the weight of the moment. "I have complete confidence in you, Captain. Britain's finest are about to remind the world why we don't negotiate with terrorists." As Sarah walked toward Briefing Room Alpha, she passed a bank of monitors showing real-time air traffic throughout British airspace. Air Force One was clearly visible, maintaining course toward Heathrow with less than 2 hours until scheduled arrival. President Biden and his security team had no idea that their safety depended on the success of a mission being led by a pilot who had been unemployed just hours earlier. The briefing room was filling with volunteer crew members and tactical support personnel. Sarah recognized several faces from her military days, pilots, and engineers who had answered the call when their country needed experienced people for dangerous work. First Officer Susan Chun was waiting near the front of the room, her expression serious but determined. When she saw Sarah, her face broke into a relieved smile. "Captain Mitchell," Susan said, approaching with obvious gratitude. "I was hoping they would choose you to lead this mission. If we're going to fly into a terrorist trap, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have in the left seat." Sarah felt a surge of affection for the young pilot she had trained and mentored. "Susan, are you certain about this? You know the risks we're facing." "Captain, you taught me that flying is about more than just moving people from point A to point B," Susan replied. "Sometimes it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous." Master Sergeant Williams introduced himself as their flight engineer, a stocky man with the calm confidence of someone who had spent 20 years keeping military aircraft operational under hostile conditions. His presence would be invaluable if they faced mechanical problems or needed to implement emergency procedures. The mission briefing began with updated intelligence reports and tactical assessments. Sarah learned that 2 of the 3 terrorist cells had been identified and were under surveillance, but the 3rd remained unknown. Her flight would serve as both operational decoy and intelligence gathering platform, drawing out the remaining threats while protecting the other targeted aircraft. As the briefing concluded and crews prepared for their respective missions, Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat mixture of anticipation and focus settling over her. This was what she had been trained for, what her entire career had been preparation for, even when she hadn't realized it. In 90 minutes, she would be climbing into the cockpit of an aircraft that terrorists intended to attack, leading a crew of volunteers into a situation that could go wrong in dozens of different ways. But she would also be protecting innocent civilians, defending her country's interests, and proving that some people still understood the difference between duty and convenience. Wellington had been wrong about one thing. Her aviation career wasn't finished. It was just beginning a new and far more important chapter. The substituted aircraft sat at Gate 31 like a perfectly ordinary Airbus A330, its Skyline Airways livery gleaming under the terminal lights. To casual observers, it looked identical to any other commercial airliner preparing for a transatlantic crossing. Only Sarah and her volunteer crew knew that this aircraft was potentially the most important flight in British airspace, serving as both bait and shield in a complex counterterrorism operation. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to trust her life to mechanical systems. Master Sergeant Williams accompanied her, his trained, eye-catching details that civilian maintenance crews might overlook. The aircraft was mechanically sound, but it had been equipped with additional communication systems and emergency equipment that standard commercial flights never carried. "All systems nominal, Captain," Williams reported as they completed the external inspection. The modifications are seamlessly integrated. From the outside, we look exactly like a standard commercial flight. First Officer Susan Chun was already in the cockpit, running through pre-flight checklists with the focused intensity that Sarah remembered from their training sessions. The young pilot had volunteered, knowing full well that they might face hostile action during flight, but her demeanor remained calm and professional. Checklist complete through engine start, Susan reported as Sarah settled into the captain's seat. Ground control confirms normal departure clearance for Britannia 7. No indication that anyone suspects the aircraft substitution. Sarah began her own instrument checks, noting the additional tactical communication systems that had been integrated into the standard avionics package. She could monitor both civilian air traffic control frequencies and military coordination channels, maintaining awareness of both their official flight status and the ongoing security operation. Britannia 7, this is command control, came the voice of Wing Commander Peterson through her tactical headset. All volunteer passengers are aboard. Wellington has been taken into custody for questioning. The other targeted flights are implementing similar substitution procedures. You are cleared for departure when ready. Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see the terminal building where King Charles and the command team were monitoring the operation in real time. The weight of responsibility was immense, not just for her crew and passengers, but for the broader mission that would determine whether innocent civilians lived or died. Command Control, Britannia 7 ready for pushback, Sarah transmitted. All systems green, crew briefed, mission understood. The pushback and taxi procedures proceeded normally, with ground control treating them as a routine commercial departure. Sarah monitored the tactical frequencies as they approached the runway, listening to reports from other elements of the operation. Britannia 7, tactical update, came Director Hayes' voice through the secure channel. One terrorist cell has been neutralized during attempted boarding of the original Flight 847. Second cell remains under surveillance. Third cell, status unknown, but intelligence suggests they're targeting your flight specifically. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she lined up the aircraft with runway 27 left. The unknown terrorist cell was the most dangerous variable in the equation, representing threats that couldn't be predicted or controlled through careful planning. Tower, Britannia 7 ready for departure. She transmitted on the standard air traffic frequency. Britannia 7, cleared for takeoff. Runway 27 left. Contact departure control passing 2,000 feet. Sarah advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the familiar surge of power as the massive engines spooled up to takeoff thrust. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the steady authority of modern aviation engineering, lifting off into the evening sky as naturally as any commercial flight in history. Positive rate, gear up, Susan called, following standard procedures despite the extraordinary circumstances. Gear up, Sarah confirmed, retracting the landing gear as they climbed through 1,000 feet. Williams, all systems status. All systems normal, Captain, the flight engineer reported. No unusual indications, no system malfunctions. We're performing exactly like a standard commercial flight. As they passed through 5,000 feet and made contact with departure control, Sarah allowed herself a moment to appreciate the view of London spreading out below them. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, security teams were rolling up terrorist networks while military commanders coordinated with civilian authorities to protect both British citizens and visiting American leadership. Britannia 7, tactical update, came Wing Commander Peterson's voice. Air Force One is 40 minutes from Heathrow approach. All systems remain green for presidential arrival. Your mission is proceeding perfectly. But Sarah's combat experience had taught her that missions rarely remain perfect for long. The unknown terror cell was still out there, and desperate people facing capture often attempted desperate measures. Her concern proved justified 18 minutes later, when Master Sergeant Williams noticed the first anomaly in their systems. Captain, I'm seeing unusual indications in the secondary hydraulic system, he reported, his voice maintaining professional calm while conveying underlying concern. Pressure is fluctuating outside normal parameters. Sarah and Susan immediately began running diagnostic procedures, checking system pressures and backup capabilities. The aircraft remained fully controllable, but hydraulic problems could escalate quickly from minor inconvenience to major emergency. Could be normal system variation, Susan observed, monitoring the flight controls for any unusual responses. But the timing is suspicious. Command Control, Britannia 7, Sarah transmitted on the tactical frequency. We're showing possible hydraulic anomalies. Could be mechanical, could be sabotage. Investigating now. Director Hayes' voice came back immediately. Britannia 7, we're running emergency analysis on your aircraft's maintenance history. Stand by for updates. Sarah was running through emergency procedures when Williams made a discovery that changed everything about their situation. Captain, I found it, he announced, his voice tight with controlled anger. There's a small device attached to the secondary hydraulic line, just after the main distribution manifold. It's not aircraft equipment. The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. Someone had sabotaged their aircraft, either during routine maintenance or through unauthorized access to the aircraft systems. The device could cause hydraulic failure at the most critical moment, turning their mission from controlled risk into certain catastrophe. Can you disable it? Sarah asked, beginning immediate preparations for potential emergency landing procedures. Working on it now, Williams replied. But, Captain, this device is sophisticated. It's designed to cause progressive failure that would look like normal mechanical problems. Someone with detailed knowledge of aircraft systems planned this. Sarah's mind immediately went to Marcus Wellington and his insider access to aircraft maintenance schedules and procedures. Even under arrest, his associates might have had time to implement backup sabotage plans. Command Control, Britannia 7 declaring emergency, Sarah transmitted. We have confirmed sabotage of aircraft systems. Hydraulic device of unknown capability attached to critical system. Request immediate assistance. King Charles himself responded through the tactical channel. Britannia 7, this is Command Control. Can you continue mission, or do you need immediate landing? Sarah looked at her instruments, assessed her crew's capabilities, and made the kind of decision that separated exceptional pilots from ordinary ones. Command Control, we can continue mission if Williams can neutralize the device. But we need to assume additional sabotage attempts and plan for emergency scenarios. Understood, Britannia 7. Emergency response teams are standing by at multiple airports. Your mission remains critical to overall operation success. For the next 27 minutes, Sarah flew the aircraft while Williams worked to disable the sabotage device, and Susan monitored all systems for additional anomalies. It was some of the most technically challenging flying of Sarah's career, requiring constant attention to potential system failures while maintaining the appearance of normal flight operations. Got it, Williams finally announced, his voice showing relief and satisfaction. Device neutralized and removed. Hydraulic systems returning to normal parameters. But, Captain, there could be additional devices we haven't found yet. Then, we find them, Sarah replied with determination. Williams, complete system inspection. Susan, monitor all flight controls for any unusual responses. We're not letting saboteurs compromise this mission. As they worked through the technical challenges, reports continued flowing through the tactical communication system. Air Force One was approaching British airspace on schedule. The second terrorist cell had been captured during their attempted backup attack, and airport security was reporting normal operations throughout the system. But the real victory came 48 minutes later when Director Hayes transmitted the news that made everything worthwhile. All stations, this is Command Control. Air Force One has landed safely at Heathrow. President Biden is secure and proceeding to the NATO summit as scheduled. All terrorist cells have been neutralized. Mission success across all objectives. Sarah felt tears of relief and pride forming in her eyes as she processed the magnitude of what they had accomplished. A coordinated terrorist attack had been prevented, civilian lives have been protected, and international security had been maintained through the courage and professionalism of people who understood that some things were worth risking everything to protect. Britannia 7, this is Command Control, came King Charles's voice through the tactical channel. Outstanding work by all crew members. Your country is proud of your service today. As they continued their flight toward New York, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary day that had transformed her from unemployed airline pilot to national hero. Marcus Wellington's attempts to destroy her career had inadvertently placed her in exactly the position where her unique combination of military and civilian experience could serve the greatest good. The aircraft flew smoothly through the night sky, carrying its volunteer passengers safely across the Atlantic, while the real passengers of the original flights were rebooked on later departures. Below them, the lights of shipping lanes and distant cities reminded Sarah why their mission had mattered so much. 8 hours later, as they approached John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, Sarah received a final transmission that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Captain Sarah Mitchell, came King Charles's voice through a secure satellite communication link. Upon your return to British soil, you will report directly to Buckingham Palace. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II once said that honors should recognize not just past service, but ongoing dedication to duty. Your actions today represent the finest traditions of British service, both military and civilian. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion as she understood the implications of the King's words. Your Majesty, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve under your command. The honor has been entirely mine, Captain. And Captain Mitchell. Yes, Your Majesty. Marcus Wellington has been charged with terrorism, treason, and conspiracy to commit mass murder. His airline career is indeed finished, as he predicted yours would be. But yours, I suspect, is just beginning a new and far more important chapter. As Britannia 7 touched down smoothly at JFK Airport, Sarah looked at her Victoria Cross medal gleaming in the cockpit lighting. When she had earned it in Afghanistan, she thought she understood what it meant to serve with honor. Today had taught her that honor wasn't just about individual courage in combat. It was about standing up for what was right, even when powerful people try to break you down. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the throne room at Buckingham Palace as King Charles III personally presented her with the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for gallantry. The citation read simply, "For extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty in preventing terrorist attacks, and protecting civilian lives through voluntary service under extreme personal risk." Marcus Wellington watched the ceremony from his prison cell, finally understanding what real leadership looked like and why some people couldn't be broken by corporate politics or personal threats. And First Officer Susan Shun, promoted to captain after the mission, kept a photo on her desk of the moment when Sarah had taught her that flying was indeed about more than moving people from point A to point B. Sometimes it was about standing between evil and innocent people, even when the cost might be everything you had worked to build. The airline industry never forgot the day when one pilot's refusal to accept humiliation became the foundation for stopping one of the most sophisticated terrorist plots in British history. But Sarah Mitchell never forgot that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when someone thinks they've broken you completely, and you prove them wrong by remembering who you really are.